Connections, Heal the Divide Podinar series. And today our theme is building powerful client relationships. And actually, as you'll find through the next hour, it's about building powerful relationships of any kind. So our intention for today is to explore what David calls the 6 characteristics of exceptional relationships. We'll talk about how to decide how much to disclose in a relationship, particularly when you're getting to know somebody and maybe you want to have a closer relationship, and how do you think about how much to disclose? We'll talk about what it means to stay on your side of the net, particularly in a more challenging conversation, and talk about what we mean by the net. We'll talk about the importance of listening for and talking about and discovering our emotions, particularly in a relationship that may have some stress around it, and how to build trust with people who are different from us, which Lord knows the world could use more of that, and how to increase clients as coaches, how we can help our clients increase their competence of being in relationship, particularly when it's hard to be in a relationship. So with that, I'm really excited to be introducing my guest, David Bradford. David is the Eugene O'Kelly II, Senior Lecturer Emeritus in Leadership at Stanford University Graduate School of Business. He's developed the most popular elective there, which he tells me 85% of the students take it, called Interpersonal Dynamics. He's the author of 7 books, and the one we'll be focused on most today is called the best-selling book called Connect, Building Exceptional Relationships with Family, Friends, and Colleagues. So David, welcome. It's so lovely to be with you.
It's good to be here. Thank you, Alison.
So David, so as you said, that you created the most popular course at Stanford Graduate School of Business. What's your sense of what made it so popular?
Well, it's a very interesting course. It's a course in which students working in 12-person groups start to look at their relationship and how they deal with each other, how they raise differences and difficulties, how they connect. And what they find, and this is really important because our students are some of the cream of the crop, too often think in order to be influential, leader-like, powerful, sexy, whatever you want, I have to pretend to be something I'm not. And what we discover is that when you are yourself in an appropriate way, you are more leader-like, more influential, more attractive to others. So students find it very validating, as well as learning a series of competencies that we'll talk about, that we describe in the book and we'll describe today. So they walk away with a greater ability to be themselves and to build the relationships that they want.
Yeah, so one of members of our audience, and it's Monique, I think, asked if that's the course called the Touchy Feely course.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, it's well known as the Touchy Feely course. Yeah. You know what you said about that, David, that really speaks to me, and there's a lot of what you said that really speaks to me, is this idea about being myself, particularly when it's challenging. And I'll speak for myself now. I can tend to, under stress, I can tend to not be myself because I don't fully trust myself to share myself appropriately. So I'm curious, did that make sense?
Very much so.
So when I say that, what comes up for you?
Well, usually when we are concerned about that, we are upset at the other person, or we're worried about how we're coming across, and we sort of slip into a stylized way of being. I'm sure we're going to talk about this later, but one of the reasons the course is called Touchy Feely is the importance of emotions. And we tend to underplay emotions, but they're very powerful because emotions tell us and tell other people a lot about ourselves. So if I'm liking something, or if I'm bothered about something, that tells about me. So when we are stressed, doesn't necessarily hurt to say, hey, I'm feeling a bit stressed right now. And often sharing that emotion decreases the level of stress we're feeling. Or if we're saying, gee, I'm feeling a little turned off. I think that if we say that with the intent to build a relationship, not to attack the other, those times in which we do feel emotional, we can use emotions to connect. Now, that doesn't mean that we share everything. I want to be clear about that. People who share everything, we hospitalize them. That's not a sign of mental health. We are judgmental.
Or we make them president.
I'm not going to go there, thank you. That's too loaded a topic. And my concern would be that I might alienate some of the audience. And I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's where I am right now.
Yeah, of course.
So I think that when we are worried about what the effect is, we may want to think of seeing are there ways we can share that. Gee, this is not occurring to me now, but could I say, you talk about coaching clients, hey, this conversation isn't going well, and I'm concerned about that. Concern is an emotion. I really want it to go better. That's expressing a feeling. How is it with you? And that's a reaching out way to express my feelings.
Yeah, that's really speaking to me, David. When this can be challenging for me is when I occasionally help my son. He's prepping for the ACT or has, and some of the math things are really hard for him. And frankly, like it's been a long time since I've done it, so it's hard for me too. And he gets frustrated, and then I'll feel a degree of frustration about his frustration. And what he says is I get teachery, my voice gets teachery. And what I know about me is that that's me not trying not to sound frustrated, but being frustrated. And what I think I'm hearing you say in that moment is that I could just say, boy, Cole, I'm feeling frustrated right now. What about you? And this is really important. I so want to help you with this.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And if I could build on that, not only can we express our emotions, but can we listen to emotions of other people that may not be fully expressed? Could you say to him also, I'm wondering if you're feeling frustrated too?
Yeah.
And that in a sense legitimizes his feelings and allows you to connect with him. You have something in common.
Yeah. Yeah. So a couple of questions are coming up I'm just seeing in the chat box. And one is about that I think we'll talk about. One is about boundaries. And when you think about relationships and closeness and challenges in relationships, how do you also think about boundaries and what a boundary is and how we set it?
Yes, I think a boundary is saying to another person, this is something I don't want to deal with right now. So let me tell you a story that happened to me recently. I'm having a little trouble with my eyes, which worries me, concerns me. And I was my wife and I, were having dinner with friends of ours. And Jane Ann was trying to give me advice around it. And I was feeling annoyed about that. I didn't need it. So I set a boundary. I said, Jane Ann, I'm sure you're trying to be helpful, but this isn't helping me. I prefer not to talk about it now.
Aww.
Well, that's setting a boundary. It's saying where I am. It's not attacking her. So I think we need to set boundaries about, this is what I want to talk about. This is what I want to deal with. It may be you're talking about the fear of being overwhelmed by emotions. A boundary can be saying, I'm feeling so emotional, I don't trust my response. I need 10 minutes to collect myself. That's a boundary.
That's a really good one too.
And we can also help other people set boundaries. Could you say to your son, is this not a good time to work on math? Would you like to set another time? Which is encouraging him to set a boundary. And we need to have boundaries, otherwise we're too intrusive or other people are too intrusive. And that's not a way to build relationships.
Yeah, that's a great example. And that does work with him. I'll say, since you're getting frustrated, do you want a break? Is there something else? And that seems to help some. So let's talk about, you talk a lot about exceptional relationships in your book and how you define those. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Sure. First of all, let me say that relationships are on a continuum, and we need relationships all along the continuum. We have some that are friendly or distant. So for example, I do the food shopping in the house. So I know the butcher a little bit. So we say hello and we say, how are you? And both of us say we're fine, whether we are or not. I do not want to hear about the fight he's had with his partner. I don't want to have a deep relationship, but I want to have a friendly one. There are other people that we want to play tennis with, or go to a show with, or talk about politics with. And there's others that we want to have more personal, more intimate. And then there are some that we want to have what we would call exceptional. And we say that if you have 3 or 4 exceptional relationships, you're ahead of the game. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, there are many people who I don't think have any. So I want to validate this continuum, and also want to talk about how you can move any of these relationships further along the continuum if you want it. But you may not want it. You may want to set a boundary. So let me talk about these characteristics. The first one, which we've alluded to, is, can I be more fully myself? Can I share what is relevant to our relationship at this point in time? Again, it's not sharing everything. It's what's relevant to us right now. So what's relevant right now is, I'm feeling excited about this podcast. I'm hoping it's going to be helpful. I love talking about this material because it's very important to me. It's really my life's work. So can I be myself? Second, can I help you be more fully yourself? Can I build conditions where you feel safer, more comfortable with sharing what's important to you that's relevant to us? Third, do we have confidence that this information will not be used against us, against me? And if it is, can we deal with it? And that, by the way, is part of the way we build trust. We'll come back to that. Fourth, can we be honest with each other? Again, it's not saying everything. And we'll talk later about not being brutally honest, which is usually more brutal than honest. But can I share what's going on with me and going on with us? Now, any relationship is going to have glitches, going to have conflict. Next month, I will have been married 58 years, believe it or not. Even I think I have a very exceptional relationship, but we get mad at each other. I do things that annoy and really bend her out of shape. Can we productively raise this and resolve it? And can we do it in a way that further deepens the relationship? Finally, are we committed to each other's growth and development? And that might require that I share things that you may not want to hear at this point in time, but I'm committed to you. Now, each of these are on a continuum as well. But I think what's important is that if you want to deepen a specific relationship, Ask yourself, is there one or two of these that's really relevant now? Have I been sitting on some information I need to be more honest about? Is there a problem that I've shoved under the rug that I need to bring out, we need to deal with? Is there stuff about me that I haven't fully shared? And I think this can give a clue as to what step to take to deepen the relationship.
Yeah, the more you talk about this and the more I look at these and think about them, David, the more I see how integrally woven they are.
Yes.
Like when I think about challenges that I have and I can have in close relationships, it's like, do I dare take the risk? I'm just narrating my own experience. Is it worth it?
Yes.
Right. Is it worth it to bring up that when this person does X, it does this in me? So it's like this idea of like being fully myself and being honest with the other person and raising it productively, and that all being about helping us both grow together. Like it's all woven into one. At least that's how I'm kind of.
Yes, I think you have it, and you've made two very important points I want to build on. One is all of these involve risk. They may seem obvious, and the question is, why don't we do it? And they're all risk. If I share something about myself, will you reject me? Will you start to read in more than what's going on? If I encourage you to share more about yourself, will you tell me more than I want to know at this point in time? Will my being more honest hurt the relationship? And we've all experienced that. So these all involve risk. But you had a wonderful phrase, Alison, when you said, is it worth it? And Carol, my co-author, has taken this in a very useful way. She says, change the pronoun, change it to ask yourself the question, am I worth it? Are you worth it? Is the relationship worth it? And if you do that, the answer may be different. The conclusion may be, yes, it's not worth it. And I'm not saying we should share everything. But that's a nice litmus test to make sure we're not holding back more than we have to.
So you said something, I mean, that feels so important, so important. This question of like people avoid, we humans avoid conflict because we don't want to upset the other person. We don't want to upset the relationship, even if it's an important relationship. I'll choose not to disrupt it by bringing in some degree of conflict, and it's so easy to make the calculus, it's not worth it. And by the way, I can make the argument the other way, which is that, yeah, is the relationship worth it? It is, which is why I'm not going to bring it up. So what's the how do you convince people that actually bringing up the challenging situation is what the relationship gives it oxygen and gives it needs? I mean, what gets people over that hump?
Well, again, there are times not to raise it. I want to legitimize this. I don't want everybody to go out and walk around and say, I'm going to say everything on my mind. That may not be a wise thing to do. So we use judgment, but we tend to err on the side of caution. Mark Twain has a wonderful saying. He said, a cat doesn't sit on a hot stove twice, but it doesn't sit on a cold stove either. That we overreact to past events that have not turned out well. So I think that we need to keep in mind that there's a cost in raising it and there's a cost in not raising it. Now, one of the things which I find is that in building a relationship, when I take the risk of raising an issue, saying more about myself, that could go south, but it also tends to be the thing that further builds it. Because particularly if I phrase it, I'm doing this because I want a better relationship. I want to know you better. I want us to work better together. When that's my intention, and sharing intentions are important, it's going to increase the chance it's going to work out. Also, there are ways to raise it, which we'll come to later, which increase the chance of it being successful. But somebody also once said, the only place where there isn't conflict is a graveyard. And human beings, we're all unique, we're different. We do things that rub people the other way. We have to find out ways to meld, or not meld, but reconcile our style with the other person's style. This takes work. But if it's done with the intention of having better work relationships, the odds are it's going to turn out better.
Yeah, yeah, love that.
Let me build on that. Maybe we can see the slide. So a variation, Alice, on your questions is students say, well, how much should I raise? And we say, use the 15% rule. And here's what we mean about the 15% rule. We'll talk about disclosure for a moment. There's really 4 concentric circles. The innermost one, as you see there, is a zone of comfort, that light blue. But that's where I share anything with anybody. And I share that, I said, I've been married 58 years, I have 2 kids, I'm Emeritus at Stanford, I developed this course. I can share that with anybody. I can share that with the butcher if I want to. Then there's the outer, the yellow, orange ring. That's a zone of danger. That I probably don't want to share in this relationship at this point in time. The 2 intermediate circles, the dark blue, is a zone of learning. And so what we say is, if you're in the zone of comfort, move 15% out of the zone of comfort into sharing something or doing something, being a little more honest than you normally would. 15% is probably not going to be disastrous. Also, if I share 15%, you're likely to share 15%, and then the relationship can grow. But also, I now become more comfortable in this relationship with that additional 15%. So our zone of comfort that we interact with has grown. And I can now share another 15%. I don't want to share 45%. That's going to spook me or the other person. But ask yourself, when you're having a conversation with somebody, could I deepen it a little 15%? And I find when I keep that in mind, often when I'm talking with somebody, I can drop it a little bit. And the other person feels more comfortable, trust builds, and the zone of comfort expands, and our relationship expands.
That's lovely. Well, let's take a brief. There's lots of action in the chat box. If you'd like to raise a question with David, feel free to go to the reactions button and raise your hand. And while you're thinking about that, Dana, is there some things some questions or comments in the chat box we want to be responsive to?
Hey, so one question that I saw come up was back related to boundaries that I know you already touched on a little bit, but just is setting boundaries a part of building powerful client relationships? I know we were talking about family boundaries, but also, maybe taking a step further to client relationships.
Yes, I think that we do that all the time. When I've done a lot of consulting and have had clients. There have been times in which I've had to set boundaries. So what's coming now to mind is I'd built a strong relationship with the CEO of a company, and he was starting to talk about some marital issues he was having. Well, I'm not a therapist. My wife is, but I'm not. And what I said was, John, I'm really distressed that you're having that problem. I hear how painful it is. It's not something that I can deal with. I'm not qualified for it. But then I went into self-disclosure. I said, I've been in therapy, which I have been, and I found it helpful. Now that's a little bit of risk because I've had times in which people have said, ooh, I think less of you that you've gone for therapy. Well, that's their values. It's not mine. So I shared what I found helpful, and I said, I think rather than us dealing with it, are there ways I could support you thinking of getting more professional help? Well, that's setting a boundary. There's also times in which people are setting boundaries they don't have to set. So one of the things that I'm sure all of you do, I know I do, is talk about the issue of confidentiality. So sometimes people don't share things because they're afraid of what's going to happen. So one of the things that I say, which is a boundary, is I say, what you tell me is in confidence. However, if I hear the same information from 3 people, I'm going to feel free to use it in ways I think is most useful to the organization and the relationship. But I won't share it if I only hear it from you. Well, that's defining a boundary that hopefully makes them feel more comfortable.
Yeah, that's helpful. And for me, and I'll go to the next question with Pamelia there, is yeah, I've had clients that wanted to call me on nights and weekends.
Yes,
right,
that's a
and talk
boundary.
talk about boundaries. And I'm curious if you all want to put in the chat box how when you've had clients with very maybe low, few, or very porous, I should say, boundaries, maybe put in the chat box how you have handled boundaries with kind of more boundaryless clients. Pamelia, question or comment?
Hi, I do have a question. I couldn't figure out how to phrase it for the chat, so that's why I raised my hand. So my question is, I love when you said that it's a continuum. It's not like an absolute, because I think a lot of times I use good, better, and best, to evaluate quickly where something is falling to see what I need to do with it. But my question is we were talking about the 6 characteristics of exceptional relationships. And then we're talking about having powerful relationships with our client. So my question is there some, on a continuum, is there some of those that are like essential to even get to like the good level that we need to have out of those 6 things? Is there something that we can measure that against to say, we're here, we're at good, and that might be good enough because some of our clients may not want to go deeper, or we may not want to go deeper. So that was my question. And is there, or some of these, like, you got to have these to just even get on the scoreboard?
Yeah, great question. I think you need all 6 in all relationships, but where you are along that continuum is going to vary. So I can't think of a client relationship in which I'm 0 around honesty, or I'm 0 around conflict, or I'm 0 around trying to help them. I've got to be along there. But I think you're asking the right question when you say, is this good enough? And maybe what you'll do is you'll quickly run down the 6 and say, yep, am I sharing those parts of myself which are good enough for this relationship? Am I getting enough from the client? Do I feel that they are sharing stuff that is relevant, or am I sensing they're holding back things that are important? So I think that we can do our own calculation, but I think all 6 are relevant. Some are more relevant than others. I think that I wouldn't want to push any one of them up to the top because as right away, because as Alison said, they're all interrelated. So I may need to want to increase my self-disclosure, but I'm only going to move that up so far. And then I'm going to check how much self-disclosure you're going to do that's relevant to this relationship. And once both of us do it, then I'm going to set a sense of, well, how's our trust level? How's our honesty level? And so sort of see it as 6 maybe dials. And which dial is going to be more relevant at this point in time?
Yeah, so I'm thinking that's great. Thank you for that, because that helps me. It clarifies that in my mind, because I'm like thinking like, do I need to have so many of these? But like you say, all of them, but just that maybe they're at different intensities. So you regulate them, but you're looking at them individually as where they are. So that makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Yeah. And there are questions, particularly in the coaching kind of space, about how much a coach should share with a client about themselves. And there are various, there's some, points of view that say, don't share anything. Don't share anything. And I can tell you that doesn't work for me, because I need to know that there's another human across from me. And I'm curious what comes up for you, David.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And again, we don't want to be a motor mouth and share everything. But we're a human being, they're a human being, we want a human relationship. I'm not Mr. Spock of Star Wars of having no feelings. I think this is not only relating to friendship and to the coaching relationship. As I said, I've been in therapy and I've had more than one therapist. And I find that when my therapist shares things about herself that are relevant to what is going on, my trust deepens, my disclosure deepens. Now, I don't want to hear everything. I do not want to hear necessarily their personal problems, but I may want to hear that they've struggled with that issue too. Then I don't feel so strained. And of course, one of the things we can talk about is when you have these competencies, you can talk about how we're talking. See, you can move up a level of abstraction. You can say, I'm feeling pretty comfortable about what we're sharing. I'm wondering if you're feeling comfortable. And you share something personal, you may want to check in and say, I did that because I want to be known in a relevant way. Was that okay for you? Or was that too much of David? You can talk about how we're talking. And that's a real competence.
That's one of my favorite things. I call it the conversation about the conversation.
Absolutely.
I love that.
That's really true. Alison, I wonder if we can talk about feedback, because I think that's so crucial to a coaching relationship.
Absolutely.
Because we wonder whether we can raise difficulties with the client.
Yeah, let's go there. And I wanted to plant a seed that we didn't talk about before, but I thought might be really helpful, is if you coached me through something, not coached like you're a coach, but I'm like, okay, I'd come up to you, David, here's a kind of a challenge I'm having, and how you would kind of talk me through that. Would you be open to doing that?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Let's try it.
Okay, let's do that. Okay, do you want to do feedback first?
No, let's do this first. You tempted both me and the audience, I think.
Well, I was thinking, everything for me anyway always works better when there's a demo. And then I realized I'm probably going to have to be the demo. Then I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to come up with something. So this is, which is always somewhat embarrassing. And okay, so here's my situation. Is I run a CEO roundtable, and it's a roundtable where I'm kind of both a member and a facilitator. So I'm playing this odd hybrid role. And we have a retreat this weekend, and I'll be spending tonight and all day tomorrow. And I've prepped for hours and hours and hours and hours, and I mean hours and hours and hours and hours. And the amount of money they're paying me isn't anywhere near close to the number of hours I'm putting into it, but I'm also a member. So it's this kind of a odd hybrid hybrid relationship I got myself into. And so now I'm just feeling, what am I feeling? I'm feeling tired and somewhat now ambivalent. And I'm feeling overwhelmingly responsible
Uh-huh.
for them, for what I've committed to. But as it stands right now, if something doesn't change, I've lost my energy for it.
Do you also, Alison, feel a little resentful?
Yeah. Thanks for listening. Thanks for hearing that. I don't know that I would have gotten there on my own. And yes.
And do you also perhaps feel a little unappreciated?
Yeah. Yeah. That's, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And if I were in that situation, I might be afraid of having that leak out and my saying something if things don't quite go perfectly.
Yeah. That can happen. Yeah. 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 I can see how if I go into this, it's, I mean, if when I spend like an hour or two with people, self-managing is not so challenging, but when you spend an entire weekend with people, leaking is much more likely. For me anyway.
The other question I have is, you put a lot of time into this, it sounds like. Is that typical of you, of working and reworking and working, reworking and
Well,
something?
You know, actually, it's not.
Oh,
At first, I thought maybe that's just how I am, but no, that's how I am with this.
uh-huh.
Not how I am, and I don't do with that with the classes I teach. I don't at all.
And what is it about this that has prompted that?
Boy, it's almost like you've done this before, David.
No?
Because there is something about this, you know. Oh gosh, I'm just realizing it based on what you said. There's so that I'll say something, but I can't explain it yet.
Okay.
I am not in it somehow. I am not in this.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I can't even exactly explain that.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but I'm not in it.
Alison, let me suggest we stop here.
Okay,
This
great.
has been wonderful. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
A great idea. Can I summarize what we've been doing?
Yeah, do. Yeah, lovely.
I think the most important thing was getting into feelings.
Super helpful. It was helpful for me.
Yeah. Well, it's helpful for me to know you.
Thank you.
I think the other thing was, in terms of asking questions, like I have no answers. All I've got are questions. You've got the answer. I'm sure all of you being coaches know the statement that the client always has the answer within them. Our job is to help them find it. The other thing was giving you space. So at the very end, you said, gee, I don't know why this is going on. And one of the troubles is we think we have to have an answer. But what you were in touch with was something's going on that I don't know what it is, but I need space. And I think if we would continue that, you would continue to have space to do your own exploring.
Yeah, well, I'm really appreciating about what you said. I'm appreciating a lot. It's like not like we don't need to have an answer right now. No. Like I think we coaches can kind of go right at that, like figure it out. What could it be that like, and it actually is, yeah, in some ways easier just not to try to figure it right now, just to give it space.
Well, we all use the image of an onion. If I force an answer, it'll be the surface answer.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you had an answer, is there a deeper layer, a more meaningful layer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'll reflect that now, after our conversation, I'm feeling more myself. Yeah, I'm feeling more grounded.
Good.
Yeah, yeah. Nice. Okay, so how about we just take a break for questions and maybe maybe it's a time to notice what David did. Maybe call it out, something that you're curious about, or maybe just naming what you saw that you thought worked. Who would like to just give voice to that? Anyone? And again, you might need to raise your hand under the virtual raise hand button. Anna, are you trying to talk?
Yeah.
I saw you like trying to find.
I know, I was trying to find my little hand raising because I'm on my iPad and it's different. Well, I was just enraptured by the connection between the two of you. It felt so strong and so direct. The physical difference, the use of technology didn't interfere at all. And I really felt as though I was sitting there right with you. But more importantly was how connected David was with you. That just really struck me.
Thank you. And I, there's a quality to David's voice I'm noticing that is just really soft and inviting and gentle. And I get the sense that David is connected with himself.
Yeah.
And so it was like, I felt it like an invitation to connect both with him and myself. So yeah, thanks, Anna.
And I think it would have been there even if this had been a phone conversation because of the voice and because he was really listening and hearing you. But the physical connection, the energy connection was what was really striking me most of all, which included the voice, but it was also the visual for me.
Yeah, thank you. And I love these lovely pauses David put after. The pauses felt really powerful. So Richard, question.
Thank you, Alison. My intention was to acknowledge what I think you just did, which is that David showed up with great patience, not in a hurry. I'm here with you in this conversation. I'm not in a rush. You are this dialogue, the space between us is what I'm focused on right now.
That's beautiful, Richard. Yeah, and our clients don't have that much patience in their day that we can kind of create that well.
And even right now, in the conversation I'm having with you in the moment, I got stuff going on around me, which I could be distracted by. And my focus right now is the conversation that you and I are having, because I'll be able to get back to that. I'm only going to talk here for another 10 seconds and then I'll be able to get back to that. But right now, this conversation with you is the most important thing I'm doing right now, other than breathing, let's say.
Thank you. I feel that, Richard. Thank you. I see you.
Can I share something?
Yeah.
When you suggested this at the beginning, Alison, the feeling I had was, oh my God, here I'm in front of all of these experts. Am I going to fuck this up? And I thought, should I share that? Because that's a disclosure. And then I thought, oh, no. And now I'm going to do a digression. There's a book I read too long ago called The Zen of Tennis. You may have read it. And it said, in playing tennis, you don't say, are my feet the right way? Have I cocked my arm the right way? Is it back? And so on. If you do that, the ball goes right by you. Instead, you look at the other court and you say, where do I want the ball to be? So what I said to myself when I was having those feelings was, David, stop thinking about yourself. Think about Alison. So I acknowledged the feelings I had and decided to temporarily set them aside. Because what is really important is the other person. I think the other thing which I want to say is, well, all stories come up. Apparently Pablo Casal, the great cellist, was asked, how do you play the notes so well? And he said, it's how you play the spaces. And I think in conversation, we think what's important is what we say, but I think it's just as important about the space we provide. And we often, at least I often feel, gee, I need to rush in with something. Well, take your time.
Yeah, thank you, David. I appreciate it. Andy, I saw you had your hand up and you took it back down. Andy, do you want to share, or do you feel like the moment's passed?
No, sure. What really struck me was David's initial couple of questions where he just fed back emotion that he saw, not necessarily that you'd verbalized, and that led into everything. It deepened the connection and the rapport, deepened the space, but it was the emotions that opened the door to the rest of the conversation. That's what I saw.
Thank you, Andy, but I want to add some.
Sure.
I'm not sure I saw it completely, but where I went by focus on Alison is, what would I be feeling if I were in that situation, which gave me a hunch that Alison might be. And notice I said, are you feeling? Not with hopefully with a question, not with a statement, because I don't know what she's feeling. To do that, I would be over the net, which we'll explain in a minute. But I had to use myself. And again, can I forget about myself in order to listen to myself? And I think that's really important in relationships.
Yeah. Well, so I'll want to give voice to Heather's comment, and then we'll go to the net. So Heather says in the chat box how much easier it is to kind of go with the client having the answers early in the relationships, and the longer we work with the client, how tempting it can be to feel like, oh no, I've worked with you long enough, now I need to have the answers. right. That I get that. I so feel that, and I so get that. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Heather. Okay, so let's look at the net.
Before we do that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
In the book, by the way, a lot of this is in the book, and if I think you'll find the book helpful, and there's a lot of suggestions about how to apply it. In the book, we say advice is usually useless, and when we think we have the answer, we tend to give advice. And the reason why I find inevitably advice is useless is you're telling me what you would do, but that's your goals. That's your style. Also, it puts me in a one down position because you're saying, I, the wise person, can solve your problems, which it's hard for me to accept even if you're partially right. So beware of advice. I've got a very good friend who loves to give advice. He's almost never been helpful with advice. He's been helpful in other ways. But advice usually responds to our needs, not to the others.
I'm sorry, that feels funny to me.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so we've got, we just have time for one more thing of about 3 minutes. So given we've got 3 minutes, where do you feel drawn to share, to spend the time?
For me, I wanted to do the feedback thing because I think feedback is usually done wrong, and it's a crucial competence. And maybe all of you are competent, but I'd love to share our model. So let's go there.
Oh, I didn't think we had something on feedback. Maybe I'm just remembering.
Now,
This
what
one?
we say at Stanford is you can say almost anything to anybody if you stick with your reality.
Okay.
And what we're saying there is there are 3 realities, not one. So we've got John and we've got Susan here. Reality number 1 is John's intentions, his motives, his goals, his needs. It leads him to behave in certain ways, his behavior, his tone, his voice, his gestures, his nonverbals. That's a reality both can see. The third reality is the impact of John's behavior on Susan. How does it make her feel? How is it likely to lead her to react a certain way? John doesn't know that, but John needs to know that. So we say it takes 2 to know 1. For John to be more effective, he needs to understand the impact of his behavior. Now, most feedback is over the net. So I want you to think of a tennis net between the first and the second reality. Can't play in the other person's back court, but most feedback is over the net. We say, well, you just want to show how smart you are. You just want to dominate the conversation. You just want to show up your boss. Well, you don't know that. That's a guess. That's a story you're making up. So let me use an example of saying, you just want to dominate. That's likely to create defensiveness. But if Susan could stick with her reality, she can say almost anything. So if she were to say, you've interrupted me 3 times. When you do that, I feel dominated. Now, John can't say, no, you don't. He's over her net. He's likely to say, wow, I didn't intend to do that. So I think with clients, you can give a lot of feedback if you stick with the behavior and the impact on you. And I'm going to tell you a quick story, and then we'll see if we have time for any questions. I was asked by a CEO to consult to the organization. I went to his office to meet him for the first time. We were chatting for a while. And about 20 minutes of the conversation, he said, I don't know what's wrong with employees these days. They just are very careful what they say, they hold back. And I said, John, I obviously don't know what's going on in your company, but I've got to say something's going on for me. I'm usually a pretty forthright person, but I've found that since I've actually walked in, I've been very careful about what I say. I don't know what's going on, but that's going on within me. And he reeled back in his chair and he said, that's what they tell me. So again, I didn't know him. I didn't know the company. I only knew me. But by sticking with the impact of the behavior, I could say almost anything.
That's powerful. Yeah. 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 So anything else you want to say about feedback and the net and models or anything before we close? We've got just about the...
I'd like to make one closing comment.
Mhm.
One of the things that we stress in the book and certainly stress in the course is the fact that we are constantly making choices. when students say, or a client says, I can't, client says, I can't say that to the boss. We stop and we say, no, you choose not to say that to the boss. Technically, can't is a physical impossibility. My office here is in the second floor. I can't jump out the window and survive. Everything else is a choice. So when you feel stuck and you say to yourself, ooh, I can't raise that, I would urge you to say, I choose not to raise it. Now, maybe that's a good choice, but it's making you take responsibility. And then I want to add to that the work on mindfulness, Carol Dweck's work. When she says, add the word yet. I choose not to raise that with the boss yet. It always raises the possibility that there may be a future choice. But I want all of us to really take ownership that everything we do is a choice.